Hello, and welcome to the Finding Your Learning Preference video workshop. This is a presentation by the SSHA Peer Mentor program. The purpose of this workshop is to help you discover your learning preference and how to utilize it in your learning and studying habits. What is your learning preference? There are a multiple of 3 different learning preferences: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. People can be one single style to all 3 styles. Pause this video to find out your style using the link below. You will click on Answer the 20 questions. Once you have determined your learning preference, continue with the video workshop to learn how you can use your learning preference in learning and studying. Even if you are mainly one learning preference, keep in mind that the more ways you learn and study something, the better you will perform. Let's get started. Let's start with behaviors and characteristics of visual learners. Some of the behaviors you'll find with visual learners are constantly looking around and examining situations you enter. You prefer to read and write rather than listen to long lectures. You have a vivid imagination and think in detail and pictures. You have a greater recall for words presented visually. And you need to visually see directions, not hear them. A good example is when someone tells you directions to a location. A picture of how to get there helps you the most. Lastly, you have a better memory with faces, but tend to forget names. If any of those behaviors and characteristics are some of yours, here are some tips for you. To start off, a good tip for visual learners is to envision the topic when they are first taught. Use graphs, charts, illustrations, and lists with visual aid. Whenever you receive a handout or write your notes, leave white space around the borders to add illustrations. This will help you remember the ideas later on. Watch audio visuals found on YouTube that break down the information further. And lastly, when you get a direction to somewhere, write them down and draw them out. Now it's time to put your learning preference to the test. A photo will be shown for 4 seconds. In the 4 seconds, you will try to memorize as much of the detail as possible. Try to memorize at least 7 things. Once completed, come back to the photo and see how well you did. So what did you see? Someone with a higher percent of visual learning will be able to pull details and remember them when asked to pull from memory of what they saw. With this practice, continue to draw in the margins of your work to visually see your notes later when you try to recall them from your memory. Next, we have behaviors and characteristics of kinesthetic learners. If you're a kinesthetic learner, you will find yourself aligning with these characteristics. You are always trying to touch things out and try them out by manipulating objects. In this way, you learn and solve by doing. When you are learning, it is best if your instructor is involving you in the conversation and lecture. You remember best what you have physically and emotionally done, but not what you have seen or talked about. You get distracted easily in lectures that are more auditory and visual. You always are moving and fidgeting. And lastly, when you interact with others, you tend to use gestures. Now we'll move into your tips if you are a kinesthetic learner. Create activities to get you up and moving when you study. Do things as you say them. For example, the motions of a certain word will trigger the idea behind it. Use highlighters or colored pens to emphasize key points when you're reading. This motion is enjoyable and helps you remember. Just be sure not to highlight the whole book. Allow frequent stretch breaks so that you can keep your fidgeting to a minimum. And lastly, when you are memorizing something, use your finger to write on a table or in the air. Continue to practice the repeating motions to embed it into your memory. Now, we'll move on to an activity for kinesthetic learners. Let's put your movement to the test. Follow step by step one of the origami animals. Remember that the more you practice the motions, the better the memory will be in your head for later use. As you will notice, tips for kinesthetic learners are to constantly move or be in motion. Practice motions repeatedly in order to memorize them. Use origami to test if you can do it from memory or use it for your study breaks. The last thing you will learn about today is auditory learning. Behaviors and characteristics of auditory learners. If you're an auditory learner, you'll find yourself falling under these behaviors. You process information aloud through asking and answering questions, along with having discussions alone or even in groups. You like talking about what to do, especially pros and cons for specific situations. When you talk, you indicate your emotion through pitch, tone, and volume. Unlike visual learners, you prefer spoken directions over written directions. You are better at remembering names, but tend not to see the faces behind them. And lastly, you have difficulty concentrating when there is noise around you. Let's go over some tips for auditory learners. Read out loud when you are studying. This includes your assignments when you are trying to understand them, flashcards as you work to memorize them, and notes as you take them. Sit where you can hear when you are in lectures. This is away from doors or windows. When you attend lectures, try to record for repeated listening later. Work in quiet areas to avoid distractions. This means avoiding areas with conversations like the lantern or any room with music and television on. Lastly, use mnemonics, rhymes, jingles, and auditory repetition through tape recordings to improve your memory. After hearing what you can do as an auditory learner, let's move on to an activity to practice this. Here's a short quiz to practice your auditory tips. This short quiz tests how well you listen to the presentation. If you didn't get all the answers, try to go through and listen more carefully. Practice the tips for an auditory learner to strengthen your skill. Now that we have reviewed all of the learning styles and tips, let's talk about what a peer mentor can do. Peer mentors are here to help. They're here to aid in your success at UC Merced by providing guidance and campus resources. They can help with answering registration questions, semester planning, understanding major and minor requirements, reading your My Degree path, filling out forms, knowing important dates and deadlines, finding campus resources, assisting with the transition from high school to college, and stress and time management techniques. If you want to meet with a peer mentor, check in at COB 204 or check our website for updated walk-in hours. This ends our presentation on finding your learning preference. Make sure to follow us on social media for weekly updates on deadlines, policies, and much more. We can be found on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and you can always email a SSHA peer mentor if you have further questions. Thank you for watching, and make sure to watch our other workshop webinars.